Good morning and welcome to this, the second of our three-part series in planning and preparing for the 2020 vision. We're glad to have you here. This part of today we'll be looking at preserving our shared history. I will admit I got very excited about that when I first saw the report and was, of course, just reading the title and hadn't gotten to the rest yet, thinking they devoted an entire section of the report to the RCA archives and the Commission on History. And then I found out, no, they meant missions, which I don't think of as history. I think of it as what we're supposed to be doing now, but maybe that's just me. And I'm glad that we have wonderful people here to talk about this. JP Cinderaccion, that's always a name I'm challenged to get right. I hope I did. Is director of RCA Global Mission. He's a native of Bangalore, India, a city of 12 million people. And so he went from there to Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa, a city of somewhat less than 12 million people. Started out as a biology major, but God had other plans. And he felt his calling change. He graduated with a degree in psychology in 2000, then went to Holland, Michigan, where he received his MDiv at Western Seminary and met his wife, Katie. He's served the RCA as a missionary for 12 years, working with Audio Scripture Ministries, and then went to Global Missions as the director. And he'll be reflecting on how the 2020 vision proposal will change what RCA Global Mission is doing. I would remind everybody that what we try to do in these Reformed Church Center programs is not to say, this is what's good or this is what's bad about the 2020 vision, but this is what's different. You can figure out for your own context whether you think it's good or bad. Bethany DeVos, prior to going to seminary, served for 3 years as mission-supported staff at Mescalero Reformed Church in New Mexico. She and her husband, Korstian, currently co-pastor North and Southampton Reformed Church in Pennsylvania. So Bethany is coming at this from the perspective of being a missionary who has been in the field and being able to think about how this might affect people who are active in those missionaries. And Tom Goodhart is minister at Trinity Reformed Church of Brooklyn in Ridgewood, New York. He's been there since 2008. Prior to that, he was up in the Hudson Valley in New York State at the Mount Marion Reformed Church in Plattekill, New York. And I'll bet I am one of the only people in this webinar who even knows where Mount Marion is and has actually been there. He's a graduate of Hope College and Western Seminary, and he's functioned in various roles at all levels of the RCA, including classis president, moderator of Commission on Christian Action, and a vice moderator of the General Synod Council. He's also a past board member and former co-president of Room for All, and is a member of the 2020 Vision team. So he's coming at all of this from that perspective. And we're very fortunate to be able to have all three of these folks here with us this morning. And so we'll begin with JP and then Bethany and then hear from Tom.
Thanks, James. First, I just want to say, I'm not sure I'm saying my name correctly either. It's taken me a while to figure that out. I'm just kidding. I'm actually always impressed and grateful when people do pronounce my name. And you did it well. For those of you who don't know me, and I suspect there might be a lot of you on the East Coast who do not, James gave a pretty good overview. The other bit of tidbit that I'd like to share with you is my wife, Katie, is from upstate New York and actually has a longer history with both of my esteemed co-panelists today, Tom and Bethany. And it's always a delight. We were just kind of reminiscing a little bit about our shared time at Western Seminary and how beautiful this family that is the Reformed Church is, and how easily you've adopted me into your fabric. And so I'm really, really honored and humbled to be here this morning with you all. I am, as James also mentioned, I'm really a product of RCA Global Mission. I was raised in India under this big umbrella of the Scudders, and particularly Ida Scudder. And the reason I even went into biology as a major at one point was I was interested in medical missions, largely inspired by the Scudder legacy in India. Following God's shift in my call, I ended up being a practitioner of RCA mission. I served as a missionary on the field for about 15 years. And now it's an honor to be a member of the Global Missions staff here with the Reformed Church in America. So, and also just what an honor it is to be at New Brunswick. I really wish 2020 did not unfold the way it did, because one of my hopes was to have come and visited you in person and spend time on the campus of the oldest Protestant seminary in North America. And, you know, right now, even being a part of Global Mission, be the oldest mission agency in North America, these are big, big deals. And I am the history and gravitas of what all this means is not lost on me. So thank you for inviting me into that very country and soil where RCA Global Mission really was birthed out of. I just want to take a few minutes to just share a little bit about what 2020 has meant, because I do think it factors into where we go from here. This has been an incredibly difficult year for Global Mission, particularly our missionaries and partners. We have 91 missionaries and 61 partners who serve in 51 countries. This is a pretty big deal in terms of a spread of the variety of locations that we're in. There has been a lot of fear and uncertainty, mostly related to COVID, but also otherwise as well. So a lot of our missionaries have begun to pivot to doing work that we really weren't prepared to do. So we talk about COVID, but there's also lack of infrastructure that kind of emerged from the chaos that the pandemic unleashed on us, dealing with healthcare issues, clean water, and of course, you know, we have missionaries in Beirut, the Fords, who had to deal with explosions. We have coups that are imminent in Peru, and we had a civil war break out in Ethiopia. So there's been a lot of just hard stuff that we've dealt with, including loss, which I know a lot of you have experienced. We have as well, in terms of lives lost due to COVID. And so there's the aftermath that is still being realized. Some are immediate, with schools shutting down, governments in a state of unrest, economies being shaky, mental health issues are now beginning to rear its head, and more long-term issues will start to emerge going forward. And as always, for a lot of our missionaries, given the state that the denomination finds itself in, there's also this fear that we constantly live in of, you know, support. What happens to our support? Because oftentimes when it comes to budgetary matters, for whatever reason, missions usually is the first casualty of those budget cuts. And so that's been kind of like the place in which we've kind of been living in these past few months. And so for Global Mission, one thing that I will say, and I think all of this will factor into our discussion going forward too, I'm really, I love how RCA Global Mission is currently set up. There is a beautiful hybrid happening where we have a direct connection that churches have to missionaries, but the denomination kind of provides the structure. This is a very unique setup. Like I said, it's a hybrid setup that is often the envy of our sister denominations. We have they're very proud of our holistic mission principles and how we organize ourselves around national partnerships. And so there is this pride in our history, the way we are kind of funded and where we can go from here. And so this morning, I am actually really very aware that my role as a staff member of Global Mission is, you know, we report to General Synod. So while it's not really appropriate for me to try and influence the decisions of General Synod 2021, I want to be faithful and respectful to whatever General Synod decides. And I'm here really this morning to listen carefully, to acknowledge that I am not. I remember the first discussion that the Reformed Church Center put on regarding the Vision 2020 proposal, and Steve Matheny Vanderwell saying, I'm not a BCO wonk. I don't sleep with a BCO near my bedside table. And I would agree with him in some ways. I am that as well. But for the Vision 2020 proposal itself, and the second proposal of the Vision 2020 report, I just want to acknowledge, I know it seems like everybody says this, but I really do want to thank the team for the work they've done. I'm thankful that Global Mission plays a prominent role in the report, both in the actual report, but also in the minority report. And for us, it's been kind of, you know, where we find ourselves. I've not acknowledged with you the hard stuff, but we're also excited about what is going on. Earlier this year, we were able to kind of reintroduce to the denomination who Global Mission is through Mission 2020. We had no idea that after that, everything would kind of shut down. But currently, right now, we are working on partnerships with Western Theological Seminary in terms of how we can restructure our intercultural immersion experiences. New Brunswick is now in partnership with Global Mission and exploring a new Doctor of Ministry cohort that explores both the global church and missiology. We're working on missionary care, how to take care of our missionaries at this point, working on better telling our story, figuring out what are on-ramps for smaller churches to get more involved in the work of Global Mission, and try to engage with churches that probably will leave. How do we still stay part of their mission planning going forward? The recruitment of new missionaries is something we're thinking about. And also, like I mentioned earlier, COVID, and how does that affect our mission partners long-term? How can we stand in the gap? And RCA Global Mission has historically been a convener of relationships. We aim to continue to do that going forward. What does that look like? So these are the questions that we as a staff are trying to listen to, discern carefully together and prayerfully, and see where God wants us to go. And I'll just kind of wrap up my little bit here by saying this. Missionaries oftentimes, having been one myself, I understand it's very lonely for us to be doing what we're doing, not understanding what is happening back home with our beloved denomination. And so we've been trying really hard this year to keep them looped in, not because we have answers, but we want to hear their feedback, listen well to their concerns, their questions, their fears, their hopes, so we can communicate that better to their supporting churches who care about them, obviously. And so we've been working at kind of building a better communication channel and loop for that. And urging congregations at this point to not forget about their missionaries in their decision-making, that they would continue to look at Global Mission as allies in this reign of God that we're all called to be a part of. And so I'm here today. I'm sitting here, always willing to listen and learn about RCA ecclesiology. As I said earlier, I can't influence it, but I do want to learn more about it, and I want to have a better perspective on it. So just want to say thank you for your kind invitation. And even if it means just sitting by Tom and Bethany this morning and listening to their wisdom, I feel like it will be a win for me. So James, thank you for this. And I think I'll stop for now.
Thanks, JP. I was a little intimidated, actually, sitting next to you and Tom up here. But yeah, thank you, James, for including me in the process today, as we do continue to pray and process this important report. And part of what I want to do today is share a little bit of my story as a way of sort of framing my own comments for today. I admitted to these guys before we started today that I've been on the edges of the 2020 vision conversations quite intentionally. I was honestly kind of burying my head in the sand for a while. I didn't consult anyone in preparation for today. You're just getting my voice and my experience, which is unabashedly non-technical and nearly all heart. But this denomination, as JP sort of alluded to already, has been my home for my whole life long. And I grew up in the Synod of Albany at a church near Syracuse. I spent as much time as possible at Camp Fowler, both as a kid and as an adult, which is where a lot of those tentacles of relationship were formed. In high school, Project Timothy took me to California and then to Chiapas, Mexico. And I spent 4 years in Holland, Michigan as a Hope College student. And along the way, God sent countless faithful RCA pastors and mentors and members to love me and to teach me, to mold me, and to shape me. So as an adult in my young 20s, I was done with graduate school. I was teaching, and I thought, I'm awfully restless. I've got a heart that's ready and willing to help and to serve, even if I don't really have this whole faith thing figured out. And I was trying to figure out a way to do that. And if I was going to quit my job and move somewhere, the question was, who did I trust? Who did I trust to help me figure that out? if I decided to go off to some unknown part of the world, at least unknown to me, who did I trust with my well-being? If there was a hurricane or civil unrest, JP listed a whole bunch of things that are going on in the world, some of them which occurred to a young 20-something me, or if I get sick, who would have my back? And in the end, I turned to my church, my denomination, because I trusted both the situation they would send me into and their care of me while I was there. So that was a flight to Grand Rapids to meet with RCA mission staff to help discern what would end up being this calling. And so a few months later, it was a flight to New Mexico to interview and visit with Bob and Linda Scott, who are now retired and in Wisconsin, but at the time were longtime mission-supported ministers there at the RCA congregation on the Mescalero Apache Indian Reservation. And that one-year commitment stretched into 3. And so my time with the Classes of the Southwest, but my position there was funded by RCA churches. So I ventured to Northwest Iowa and met with some support congregations there, and later went to West Michigan to do the same thing, to share firsthand how their investment in the ministry of Mescalero, their support of this position and of me, was by God's grace bearing fruit. And JP mentioned those relationships, and that's a huge piece of this story and some of my comments in just a bit. But it was that mission speaking trip to West Michigan that took me to the front doors of Western Seminary and the realization that God was calling me there. And for that first year of seminary, anyway, long enough to meet a tall, handsome Dutch Canadian and end up with a ministry partner and a last name like De Vos. So I married into the Synod of Canada. So I share this story with you today as a way of sort of entering into some of my wonderings about this part of the Vision 2020 report and proposal. If I'm going to go out on a limb, if I'm going to sell my house and move my family, if I'm going to make a whole life commitment, I want to be sure that there is a robust, trustworthy counterbalance. If I'm all in, I need you to be all in with me. And I think of our career missionaries and even friends of mine who have taken that giant leap of faith and have done just that. And I think of the kind of and strength of support that they really need at home to have confidence in being able to make that big leap of faith. I need to know that the sending body knows what it's doing, that it's consistent, that it's organized and helpful, but not overbearing, that the requirements are reasonable. I don't need headaches and red tape. I need support and I need encouragement. And I need to know that the finances are not going to become the main concern of my ministry, or that I'm suddenly going to be without funding. I know that was a big theme of that report. I know that's a concern that's on lots of people's minds, both here and for our folks who are serving. And I have to say that reading that report stirred up in me that sense of insecurity, which is probably why you're hearing me say, I really want a solid trunk to be connected to if I'm going to go out on a limb and do this with myself and with my family. So I'm wondering what the size and the robustness of that trunk looks like if we were to move the center of RCA Global Mission out from underneath the umbrella of the denomination and move it over here. I don't have an answer for that. I'm wondering with you this morning. And as you've heard in my story and even in JP's remarks, many of our current and former missionaries are supported by broad and deep relationships within the RCA. We ran into each other somewhere, or we know someone, or we went to school together. And so I wonder what happens to those relationships when we're dealing with two separate organizations instead of one. Certainly my own calling to ministry is discerned in community. As our new ministries and development and training of missionaries, all those things happen not just once, as we know, but along the way. And so I'm just wondering what that would look like if we were to separate those couple of things out. The other piece that's really big, and I didn't know what to call it besides kinship. There's this affection and kinship that I sense in the RCA that is, it's a level of commitment to one another. It's a level of commitment to our missionaries. Some of you remember the beloved Church Herald. Do you remember the map, the global map that would have pictures on it of missionaries? I remember opening that as a kid and thinking, those are my missionaries. Those are our missionaries. In a very real sense, it was an extension of the ministry of what was happening right in my little church in North Syracuse, New York. And so there was an affection and a connection that I'm calling kinship. And so again, I don't know what happens when those aren't our RCA missionaries anymore. They are this other organization that we are maybe partnering with. I'm not sure what that relationship will look like. Maybe Tom has a little more on that. But I have to this point felt a deep sense of commitment and connection between not just our congregations and churches, but with our missionaries. And I don't know what happens when we separate those two things. So I'm in the wondering with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Bethany, and thank you, JP, and thank you, James. I am incredibly grateful for each and every one of you, and I really do love the word that you brought forward, Bethany, kinship, when I think about the RCA, and that we are so connected to one another, and perhaps that's one of the greatest gifts that the RCA has, is to remind us that we are family, that we are connected. So I love that part. Thank you, James, for inviting me to participate in this. And I so appreciate both JP and Bethany, what you both shared already. I think it's important that maybe I start where I'm coming from too, how I got pulled into this whole RCA family or mess, both. So I was one of those kids that did not grow up in the RCA, but was at the time part of a Presbyterian church back in my hometown in Ohio. And I was one of those kids that at an early age had like their whole future planned out, everything decided and figured. It didn't work out that way. But one of the things I can remember sitting in Mrs. Difford's science, I think it was a science class in 7th grade. And in my mind, figuring out what I was going to do vocationally. And not only vocationally, I also had what I would spend my summer vacations doing. And at that point, I wanted to do mission work on my summer vacation time. Now, that would eventually, I'm not going to say evolve as much as sharpen. Some of those concerns and ideas and formation would be sharpened so that by the time I went to Hope College and was introduced to the sister denomination, the Reformed Church in America, I was able to discern a call a little more focused. And and part of that discernment was like, no, your vocation is going to be missions. And like JP, I thought that was going to be through medical missions. I know that George Montanari is on this call. Again, the connections, I had the experience as a junior at Hope to go to the Apache Reformed Church on a spring break mission trip, which was incredibly powerful and transformative and rooted in kinship in such a way that an invitation was extended that I could return at some point in the future. And so after graduating Hope, I ended up in Apache for a year before going on to seminary. And seminary was not part of my concept of what mission would be. Seminary was not part of my concept of what my vocation would be for a variety of reasons. But I ended up at seminary, and I still think that the church is about mission. That's who we are. That is our identity. Okay. The 2020 Vision team was handed an incredibly challenging task. And as Don Poost delivered his message and then recommendation back in 2018, the options really were, as he was experiencing where the RCA was in our various differences and the challenges that we were facing, he offered that if this team could come together and try to discern staying together, restructuring of some form, or of separation. And while all of those elements have been discussed and picked apart, the team has really been wrestling with all of those. And I think the report tries to land on representing the Vision 2020 team report, tries to land with a little bit of each of those options. But from our first meeting together, what was palpably expressed and felt is that there is loss, and there will be more loss before things are resolved. And so what do we do with that reality? Now, I'm coming from a part of the church that loves the RCA, even as challenging as that can be much of the time. And I did not come to this with a foot out the door. But there were others who were coming to it saying, like, we've had enough, this isn't going to work, or this isn't working any longer. So with the reality that the Vision 2020 team has been dealing with that sense of loss, the reality of loss being palpable amidst all of our conversations, oddly enough, it would be after our 2-year limit, while we were still working on things. I guess I know I was sitting here at this desk in this room, so it was after the pandemic began during COVID, where at one point in our meeting, a rather challenging part of our meeting, the historic option of what took place at General Synod, was it 68, 69? James, the time when a recommendation came off the floor of Synod, that's not the correct term, of basically doing away, go ahead, James. Oh, 69, thank you, of doing away with the RCA. And that hung in our space, in our conversation. And I'm grateful that the team moved away from that. But that reality was part of the discussion. And so on the other side is, what are things if if the RCA no longer existed, what are the things that connect us? What are the things that keep us as kinship? What are the elements that, amidst our various divisions and our differences, that we can all celebrate together? And one of the things that has repeatedly been uplifted is our shared mission history. And the identity of the RCA is rooted in missions, and that wonderful historic aspect, to be sure, but obviously it's more than just historic, it's ongoing. I mean, as has been expressed here so many times. And if that is so, for those congregations that do decide to leave the RCA, what can we do? What can we offer? What can we put forward that would allow us to possibly still be together in mission, even if we weren't still in the same denomination? So that is, I think, where the heart of the second recommendation arises out of. Now I have to put on a different hat. I think that's a wonderful heart, and I love my Vision 2020 team members. I do not agree with that. I was part of the minority report, so I will just share the general concept of why I don't believe it would be healthy to move the mission agency outside of the denomination. And I think it was pretty clearly expressed in the report. But I'll just call your attention that theologically, we are a covenant community. And this relates directly with what Bethany shared, that it's about kinship. And we are called to do this thing, be the church together. And that we believe that God's mission has a church. And to separate mission, and there are some wonderful mission agencies out there in the world that is doing fantastic stuff. We're not taking away anything from that, but that our identity as the church is rooted in that mission. And that while there are obvious differences, those are real. We feel, as part of this minority report, that to separate our mission only fosters greater separation within the church itself, within our classes, the wider denomination, even congregations. That we are called to have hard conversations, that we are called to do the hard work. And if anything, it has been our missionaries over the centuries of their work sharing with us how that hard work can bear incredible fruit, and how that hard work bears incredible fruit, even if that doesn't mean that the church is necessarily taking over a particular locale. When I think about the hard work that happens, I am so grateful each and every time that my own congregation supports two of our mission personnel in the Middle East. And I am so fascinated that when they deliver their messages with us, when they share what's going on there, that they can share that this isn't all about winning or gaining the day, or it's about so much more than that. So I guess I'm just going to leave it at that for now.
Okay. So these are not the only three people whose minds are important in this discussion. I mean, there are three who are primarily important because they get to start the discussion, but this is a discussion among all of us. So I invite folks to start raising your hands, your little virtual hands. I can't see your real life hands, unfortunately. And we will invite other people into the conversation with your questions or your comments. Okay, Brad Lewis,
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank all the three panelists. I really thought these were very interesting perspectives, important ones. I'd like to start with the last comment in terms of separation and so forth. And there is another reality. I completely agree with you on the importance of global mission and what it's meant. And I've been for 6 years now involved with the American Mission Hospital, which is a huge example of that, and actually made a huge example, a huge change in even international relations between the United States and Bahrain. But there's another reality which is interesting to me, because actually RCA churches have not been reducing what goes beyond their walls over a number of years, but they are less likely to simply put it in the RCA missions just because they're RCA. So in practice, we've gone to a hybrid of sorts already. And the question, I think, and I think all of you, put some interesting things on it, is how much of that, which way does that move us? I mean, you're saying, Thomas, that you say, we're afraid we'll lose the whole thing if we don't understand it in connection with the rest of the denomination. And at the same time, we will have partners for all of this in a very different way than we did 20 or 30 years ago. So I'm just curious, how do we bridge that? How do we come to terms with that reality? How do we get more, if we stay with global mission now the way it is now, how do we get more churches to buy into it?
Friends, what do you think?
You want me to go first, Tom? I don't know if you are kind of giving me a subtle little head bobble there. Brad, thank you. Thank you for that question. That is one of those questions that I think as a staff for Global Mission, we have continued to work on. That's where the storytelling bit comes in. The denominational loyalty that oftentimes we were historically known for, it's no longer, it's not as tight as it used to be. We are now in a world where there are amazing organizations doing amazing work in other ways, and churches, our RCA congregations want to be involved in other ways as well. So as a staff, that has become something that we've been working on with our missionaries to say, okay, this is where the hybrid thing that you also referenced back comes in, right? There's the direct relationship aspect of our missionaries and our partners on the ground that we work with, but then we have a denominational structure, which I think in the past may have been what we started with, the structure, your RCA, therefore you support RCA missionaries. But I think more and more it's becoming, I would say, more even. We have the denominational structure through which we can set up partnerships, but really it has to be the partners on the ground and our missionaries who kind of take the lead in kind of showcasing why. The things that we are currently engaged in, Bahrain is a great example of it, is exciting. It's not just something that has relied on our past. I often say we're not basking in the glories of our reflected past, right? Like we are looking to use that as fuel for what God might do with us going forward. So that area, I will admit, it's an area that we're still working on. I think we're getting better at it, but it is something that we'll just have to do a much better job of going forward in order for us to be, I would say, not viable, but visible in the eyes of congregations when they look at who they want to support going forward.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call George Montanari.
Hey, thanks everyone. Hello, and thanks to our panelists. Good to see all of you again. JP, I wonder is there a sense that the other direction is taking place? We're seeing perhaps RCA funding going to non-RCA mission endeavors or initiatives or organizations, but is there any pattern of non-congregational, non-RCA funding coming to support RCA missions? So are we getting funded from Presbyterian or Baptist or Methodist congregations?
Hi, George. It's good to see you here this morning. I would say it's beginning to, it's trickled. We do partner. This is where the partnership really, one of the hallmarks of global mission continues to be what we lean on. We have partnerships like Shelvis and Nancy Smith-Mather, our mission partner personnel in South Sudan. We have Cheryl Barnes, who is in Malawi, again with the PCUSA. So we are entering into partnerships. So whether the funding comes through us or not, we kind of go into a place where we know that we can't fully support a project. So we invite other sister denominations, or even actually, I would say our local partners on the ground. Brazil is another example where there are 3 different partnerships coming together, the RCA being one of 3, to kind of work with our Presbyterian partners in Manaus. So I think that's what I'm going to see more and more of, instead of finding us to be a funnel through which money goes through, to look at us as true partners where there's mutual mission being done. I hope that kind of helps answer some of your question, George.
Thank you.
I will also add one more point that is, we do have RCA churches that have left the denomination. We have some precedent for that. They had been supporting RCA missionaries, but after having left the denomination, they still continued to support their missionaries. So that would be another example of outside funding coming in to support RCA missionaries and partners.
And I think that was one of the major concerns on the team, hearing from portions of the church that will likely be leaving the RCA. Is there a way to keep that relationship with what is currently the RCA missions alive? And that has been encouraged in the report, not only in the 2nd recommendation, but specifically with those churches that leave in the 3rd recommendation. We would really love if those congregations could continue to foster that relationship that they have.
Tom, thank you. I think that continues to be, the way RC Global Mission is set up within our structure, it facilitates this. This is not something that has to be a new way forward for us. The way we are currently set up will continue. And again, a lot of churches that have expressed their angst and their need to leave, et cetera, have all continued to say this, like, we want to keep supporting our missionaries. And so we don't have to create a new provision for that. It already exists. And there is precedent for it as well.
I was going to say also historically, looking back, there's since the 19th century, there's been precedent for letting other denominations support our folks being missionaries. And certainly Horace Underwood being one of the most famous examples. Horace was a RCA person, New Brunswick Seminary graduate who felt a call to go to Korea. The RCA didn't have money to send anybody to Korea. So he went to the Presbyterians, and the Presbyterians said, sure, we'll send you as a Presbyterian missionary. And for years, we didn't talk too much about Horace Underwood because there was this sense that he left and went and was a Presbyterian. But then as Koreans came to the United States, they found the RCA because they said, no, we didn't think of him as a Presbyterian. You're the ones who raised him up. This is the home for Horace Underwood. And they came back to us so that, we can proudly claim Horace. Samuel Zwemer happily took Presbyterian and other people's money, as well as RCA money, to get things done in Arabia. We've been doing this sort of thing for centuries now. And this is another variation on that theme. Anybody else who's got a question, a comment they'd like to share? Dave Groneveld.
So, okay, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking about the origins of mission, and I'm also remembering what Beth Marcus taught me in a retirement video that they did about her. And one of her statements, some people thought was going to offend some of the men in the room, but she said, the men weren't doing anything, so the women did it. Somebody had to do something. And so I'm just thinking about the legacy of the Reformed Church mission. It seemed to grow out of the compassion of women who got up and did something. And so I guess as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking that you guys are expressing a sense that that compassion has stayed in the Reformed Church mission work, and that there's been that real combination of the practical need and the gospel being proclaimed. And so that's, I guess I'm just observing that that's really quite a challenge for any institution to move from the grassroots to becoming something that has a structure, that becomes a part of an institution that's been, in the U.S. 350 some years, almost 400 years. So where do you think that's, I guess my question is really, how do you think you preserved that compassion and was able to successfully keep that present in the Reformed Church up to this point? So I don't know if that's just stating the obvious or what, but I don't know if you have any insights into that. Thank you.
I'm wondering if I can, I know she's in the meeting, if I can call on Mary Cansfield, who's done a lot of the history work with the Women's Board.
I remember the video. Can you hear me?
Yep.
With Beth Marcus. And the question was posed, the women always could raise more money for missions than the men could, than the denominational boards. As a matter of fact, in the first 10 years of the Women's Foreign Mission Society, $103,000 was collected. And I generally don't carry those figures around with me, but reading last night, this became obvious. And for women, their involvement with the missionaries themselves and with the structure, and the structure gave them a place. It gave them power that they never knew they had. And it really was, for women, educational. It was relationship. It was a system. It was a network. And there was a place for everybody. I don't think that sense of place is there anymore, at least to the extent that it was at one time. That doesn't mean a lack of caring, but something's happened that's disrupted that. There is a greater feeling of distance. And for missionaries, they could count on the women. There wasn't going to be any question about that. So when missionaries, at the time, things changed and missionaries had to earn their own support. That was a major change. And it really was a step away from the fullness of the system. So in listening to each of you, all of you are saying the same thing. And that is that we need a sense of closeness, of networking, and the networking needs to be trustworthy.
Yeah, with that, I think I oftentimes think of, it was a New Yorker article that I read 20 years ago. And so that the fact that I can remember this particular article, it was about Dr. Paul Farmer, who is a medical doctor and anthropologist. And he began Partners in Health, which has done tremendous work of medical care around the world. Not an RCA missionary, by the way, but he it specifically was with work helping patients with HIV/AIDS in Haiti. But Partners in Health would receive most of their funding through church organizations. And he was quoted in this article about talking how church women are the ones that basically support the majority of his work. And that has always encouraged me to think that whatever ladies' circle or the Women's Aid Society or whatever else your congregation, your church may have, these are the true movers and shakers in the world, and we should all be grateful for them.
Okay, I'm going to invite Lynn Zappanga into the conversation. Lynn?
Oh, I just wrote it out in paper.
That's okay.
Okay, I am wondering who's in charge of this new organization. You know, we've got two very different worldviews going on in the RCA right now. And if we can't get along as a denomination, I wonder why we think we can manage a mission agency. So the Denver Collective mentioned something about, you know, having people sign faith statements and that sort of thing, that people were going to have to be in alignment to fit the mold and that sort of thing. And they also want to emphasize evangelism and church growth. And yet our missionary work in the Middle East has not been about that. And in fact, our missionary work in most places has not been about just counting off how many souls we've saved. So I'm just wondering what this agency would look like. Who's going to be in charge, and how's it going to decide what the priority is? And if it's going to be a big tent, how's that going to work when we can't manage a big tent in the denomination?
So the phrase that there are many phrases from General Synods past that are meaningful and significant, but the one that has been quoted often is kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what I shared. While it's not part of the minority report, it really is a concept behind it. I don't see creating a mission agency as alleviating what is the presenting issue. And the presenting issue is not just our experience or our understanding of welcoming LGBTQ folk, but our presenting issue is that we have a vastly different understanding of what church is. There's a different way of reading the scriptures and our theologies. So this creating a mission agency does not facilitate us coming to terms with those differences. So I agree, Lynn, and I have no answer. I don't know.
Thank you. JP, anything more from your end?
Hi, Lynn. Not really. I mean, at this point, you know, from our point, we realize that there are all these conversations happening, but we really don't really have much of a say in how that gets translated out into the larger fabric of the RCA. So what we've been doing from a global mission standpoint is to keep, like I said earlier, you know, we want to make sure our missionaries are being listened to. We keep getting their feedback and kind of hearing from our partners, you know, and that I think also alludes to another question. I don't know if it came up in our chat yet from George, about what are our partners thinking about these conversations, et cetera. So the nitty gritty, I think Tom would probably be the best person to kind of articulate what was, you know, what is the thought process behind who heads the agency and the specifics that you had. From our point of view, I think what we're working on is just kind of scenario planning and are very, you know, we're just kind of, again, we're waiting for the General Synod to kind of make a decision that'll mandate for us how they see global mission going. And so we're trying really hard not to influence that process, but we're very attentive to what is being said, and paying attention to it. That if that helps at all, Lynn, I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to call on George Montmary, give him a chance to ask the question that he was.
Yeah, thank you. So a comment that Tom made began to kind of put something at the edge of consciousness for me. And then James' reflection on the experience from the Korean church with Horace Underwood made me think of the phrase reciprocal missions, that sometimes when we engage in global mission and we bring the gospel to another culture, somehow that culture ends up reflecting the gospel back to us in a way that makes us rethink it for ourselves. And I remember a particular experience from my years with the Native American community that just kind of drew I don't want to belabor the point, but a sharp distinction around the notion of unity in the church and how that is part of our witness. And words are elusive for me. I don't exactly have the question framed out wonderfully, but I do wonder, JP and others, if you can speak to the conversations that mission partners are having with whether RCA missionaries or RCA mission staff, whether it's concerns or encouragement for the direction of Vision 2020, especially on this second recommendation. What are we hearing from them?
That's an excellent question, and I think you nailed it. Those are I think it's complex in a multiple ways. First, I think technology has kind of made this bridge a little different than how it used to be. I often would say, our old colonial imperialistic style of mission was always like, I said, I don't want the decisions that will be made in the hallowed halls of Northwestern or Central College affecting how mission work is done in Niger or beyond. So that's changing because people are very aware of the conversations the RCA is having. I have met so many pastors from around the world who have talked to me and told me specifically on behalf of their church, but to communicate back to the denomination here, the RCA, that they are praying for us. And I find that to be a beautiful testimony to the work of what God has done, through our little RCA global mission. That being said, they're very aware, and I think I often say, the world is watching, and and I think Don Poos talked about this in opening worship at Synod the last time we met. It's not what we do, it's how we show up, or something to that effect. And so they're watching. That's one. The second part of it is also, I would say, equally important, but also different in the sense that the conversations we're having are not the same conversations that their church is having right now. And so for us to be mindful that, while they're paying attention, they're praying, et cetera, they're dealing with, food insecurity issues or displaced people groups and so the conversations don't necessarily fit, like what we talk about doesn't necessarily fit into what they're actually talking and wrestling with themselves. So I think the good news for me in all of this is all of us acknowledging our frailties as human beings and saying we're going to pray for each other, and we have a lot of love and respect for the RCA. There haven't been a lot of animosity directed to the RCA about what's going on. They're aware, and they've promised to spread. Personally speaking, that's been my experience. There might be other conversations happening that I'm not privy to. And I love what you said. The gospel, when it takes root in another culture, will change the person bringing it to them. And that's the mutual mission part. So I'm glad you referenced that as well. So I hope in all of this that we become changed in our conversations as well.
Thank you.
Nelda Richardson.
Good morning. My question was just a simple one. It was so interesting to hear all of your stories, and I do thank you for that. And especially you, Bethany, talking about the whole kinship with the RCA. And my question is to any or all of you, do you feel that this whole movement that's going, whether the, RCA separates, et cetera, do you feel that will deter future students or adults or whoever to become missionaries in the future for fear that they will not have the backup behind them?
oh gosh, I hope we don't get to that place.
Right. No, that's
Right,
scary.
right.
I think it's, a little scary when you think of it. Like you were saying, if you change your whole life to go out in the mission field and you feel that you don't have that backup, I would be afraid myself personally.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the recommendation that concerned me was that there wasn't any money to go with it. It was sort of like, well, what I read was we'll send some seed money, but then you're kind of on your own to make sure your churches stay attached or to find other funding. If we go that direction, I would much rather see an ongoing financial commitment from the RCA that says we're going to invest in this mission, parachurch mission thing, and it's still going to be ours, but it's going to operate on its own, if that kind of makes sense. Our congregation has several nonprofits that operate kind of in our orbit that we provide board members for and funding for, but that don't operate under our consistory umbrella. But the financial piece of it, obviously it's part of the concern, I think, for why that recommendation was made. But the spinoff without long-term financial commitment was a concern to me, certainly.
Thank you.
So I have a question that I think is somewhat of a follow-up to Nelda's question. JP, so one of the things that has come up in the Vision 2020 team's conversation, and I've heard it in other parts of the church as well, is about church planters, and that many church planters, that many of the church planters that the denomination is currently working with, and I think that that entire phrase needs to be used, that many of the church planters that the RCA is currently working with have a more evangelical kind of background and feel that the denomination stance needs to be clearly defined. And so some of the pushback that Vision 2020 team has discussed is that if we don't project a clear kind of answer, we may be losing these church planters and the congregations in which they would be serving. I wonder if, I'm not sure if I've been very clear. I'm trying to be careful how I say that without putting too much of a value judgment on things. But if you're following what I'm talking about, church planters, has that same mentality or conversation arisen as it relates to new mission personnel? This is just a wonderment that I'm having.
Thanks, Tom. That's a good question. It's not one that we're kind of oblivious to. We're very aware of that. Those kinds of questions coming up for good reason. For global mission, at least I can speak from the global mission perspective. We have not changed how we, like if new missionaries come on board or new partners are vetted, et cetera, we really are very proud of our global mission principles. That's always been the driving force. And you take Chiapas, you take the MOI mission, you talk about the Maasai outreach mission. We've been doing this kind of partnering with national leaders in planting churches, like IPM is another example. So this is, again, we've done this, but we have been undergirded in our outreach in this particular disciplinary area, at least with church planting, strongly reliant on our global mission principles. So has that changed the demographic or thinking in some ways? I would say it's kind of like, it's waves, right? Like there are new personnel. Some might lean a little bit that way. But I think the global mission that you see right now, I think reflects in many ways our historic global mission personnel and protocols as far as how we have appointed and partnered with people around the world. So that hasn't, at least in my time, it hasn't been a drastic shift. I don't know if that helps answer your question, Tom, but or at least gives you some more food for thought.
Yeah, that is helpful. And I guess I should have made one other clarification. When I said church planters, I was thinking domestically, or by domestically, I'm not sure. I want to include Canada and the US when I say domestically, as opposed to mission services. Yeah.
Right.
JP, I just want to ask you a quick question from something you just said. It sounded like you made, when you were making a reference to different places that Global Missions was working, like you said IBM, and I'm sure I misheard that. Now, I worked for the Synod of New York in the 90s, and at that point, IBM could be considered a mission field all by itself. But I would think that at the very least, it's been replaced by Apple.
Yeah, you did mishear, but I do. I mean, coming from a tech capital like Bangalore, IBM is a mission field, but I meant IPM, the Presbyterian Church in Manaus. But your point stands still, James.
Something just popped up in chat. Let me make sure that the question was, what is the difference between missionaries and church planters?
Tom,
I think we're supposed.
You should take this, and then I'll add to whatever you say.
Yeah. So I don't really know what the answer would be, how to explain that. Although, as we talked about moving global mission outside of the RCA, when I say we, the Vision 2020 team, in our discussions, some of the other, oftentimes in our conversations, the language of church planting would be included in that at times, and the overall, my mind is drawing blank. When you get to be my age, you just start losing things. What is the denomination's big name for the things that we do now as a denomination?
Transformed and transforming.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. I'm sorry. I blanked out. I just blanked out. I apologize for that. Transformed and transforming, that some of those aspects would also be included. There was considerable pushback. In those conversations. Thus, it just ended with global mission, because that's really the thing that draws us most closely together. Even the concept of church planters is a little confusing, because oftentimes it's a classis that will work with a church planter. And so how it is that the denomination does that, and how that happens in different parts of the country is significantly different.
Steve, I'm going to give you a chance to say what you just wrote out loud.
So basically all I wrote in the chat was that not all missionaries are essentially church planters. They're all doing other things. And the work of their mission is showing the love of Christ and the gospel in action. But church planters are certainly in a mission field. So I would say that it's almost like, not all disciples are apostles, but all apostles are certainly disciples.
And I'm going to do the same now for Dr. McCreary.
Hello, everyone. Again, great to see you all and be here. What Steve said is what I was going to say, that, church planters are really those who are in the process of establishing new, I think that's the pivotal word there, is new local Christian congregations where a missionary teaches the gospel, establishes and plants both in new and old places, very broadly defined. But that was just thinking out loud. But thank you for allowing me to share my voice. And I did want to say, in the history of the church and the tradition of the church, hello, Mother Cansfield, because with what she said, it was that she's a mother of the church. And I've been wanting to say that for a while, so.
Well, again, we seem to be naturally coming to the conclusion of our conversation time, which is just fine. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everybody who's been involved in this conversation. Even if you didn't speak up, you've been involved in the conversation today. Have a blessed remainder of your Advent, these last 2 weeks as we get ready for Christ coming again. And I hope to see some of you at programs in the new year. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.